I just wanted to give you, I guess, a quick overview of how does a pharmacist end up in cybersecurity and what's driven that. And realistically, the answer to that has been through an approach all throughout my business career of looking at how can you actually create value in business through the use of technology and deploying the best available technology at the time to deliver both efficiencies and advantages in business processes. So when Stuart and I first started out in our business ownership career, this was one of the very first pharmacies that we bought. You can see we obviously bought for location, not for appearance. The fortunate thing was our customers never actually saw our pharmacies. So this was at Acacia Ridge in South Brisbane, and back in 1998 we actually bought 4 pharmacies across 3 states within a 4-month window, one in Brisbane, one in the Sunshine Coast, one in Melbourne and one in Sydney. And our customer base were aged care facilities and private hospitals. And the reason we selected pharmacies was, one, we bought the cheapest ones we can find, which is probably fairly apparent from the picture there. But it was all about picking places that were close by to road networks, because we're actually distributing across to those hospital and aged care pharmacy clients that were located all across the region that we were servicing there. So one of the challenges that threw up really early was there were 4 pharmacies, 2 of us. How do you actually build a really rapidly growing business? You know, we went from employees 1 and 2 to having 100 employees by Christmas that year, annualised revenues of in excess of $10 million. It was a pretty rapid growth story. But with 2 of us and 4 locations across different states, we couldn't be there to lead in person on a daily basis. You know, for that first 12 months or so, I never spent longer than 72 hours in one place. So I basically spent, you know, it's funny now in a post-COVID world, but I would literally spend most of my life on planes going between Melbourne, Sydney, Brisbane, drive up to the Sunshine Coast, rinse and repeat and do that over again, building processes, building systems. And the major technology piece that we actually used then to be able to both send information out and to receive information back in was this one. So fortunately, we've come a fair way since then, although unfortunately the sad reality is that without the healthcare industry, fax manufacturers would actually no longer exist. But there's still some pretty horrendous stats around the number of faxes that are still getting sent in healthcare each week. But being able to use that was the best available technology that we had at the time, and that was the way that we communicated information and sent directives in and out across those different locations. The business grew pretty rapidly, and one of the things that we realised was that the advantage that you actually get from being physically disconnected from a lot of your locations is it really intensifies the need to build systems and processes that are replicable and that allow you to actually grow and to deliver growth. So the pharmacy business grew very rapidly. We had locations all over Australia, and for a decade or so, you know, we had our ups and downs, but things were ticking along pretty nicely. Then in 2007, Ramsay Healthcare were one of our clients. We were their biggest pharmacy provider nationally at that stage. And when the ACCC actually blocked their growth in terms of further expansion of hospital sites, they needed to look at what they could do to deliver growth for their shareholders. And so they looked inwards and thought, what are the things that we currently outsource that we could insource and deliver some growth metrics that way? And unfortunately for us, pharmacy was the one that they put on top of their list. So we got a phone call it was on Easter Thursday in 2007 saying, oh, you know, we've made our decision around what we're going to do, and we're going to take the pharmacy contracts in-house. As all of your contracts expire over the course of the next 18 months, we're going to take those all in-house. And so we were faced with the loss of essentially 60% of our revenue and profitability, and the business was just completely non-sustainable going forward. But, you know, everything happens for a reason, and in hindsight, that was a really critical turning point for us, and it provided a really fantastic opportunity, because we sat down and we looked really hard at what the business was that by that stage, what the opportunities were, and had a good think about, do we actually want to stay with all of our eggs in the pharmacy basket, or do we want to actually diversify a bit so we're not at risk of this happening again? So we made the decision to diversify. We had a twofold strategy. One was around taking the technology that we'd actually built in the aged care part of the business, where we were actually producing medication compliance packaging products for all of our nursing home customers here in southeast Queensland, and thought, well, with an ageing Australia, there was real advantages in utilising this technology rather than actually the alternative process, which was basically a manual hand packing process that was very labour intensive, so the cost per unit to deliver was actually quite significant. You could reduce it enormously by automating it and using technology. And you could also take the error rate of the product from 1 in 100 to 1 in a million, which was a pretty significant advantage, particularly from a patient perspective. So that was one of the strategies that we set out on. And the other one was acknowledging that, unfortunately, the reality was cancer was a growth market. There was an increasing incidence of cancer in the population, and being able to deliver cancer care services was actually going to be a strong healthcare proposition going forward. So that was a three-phase strategy that we outlined there in 2007. It was double down. The initial step was double down on cancer care pharmacy assets. Then we believed that stage 2 would be that would create an opportunity to actually run and own the cancer care hospitals themselves. And then the third step of that was that as Australia would move from a resources-driven economy into a service-driven economy, that the opportunity would be that, well, obviously cancer care services would be one of the things that you could export to Asia. Now, Stuart and I had never been to Asia at that point, other than, we'd done the odd touchdown at Singapore or Hong Kong airport on the way to and from the UK. But the whiteboard strategy back in 2007 was the three-step process, and that project was actually named Project Icon. So Stuart went away and worked on Project Icon. I built the manufacturing business, and by 2012, we'd done stage 1 of Project Icon. We built out the oncology pharmacy network. We got to and stage 2 presented, where a group of the hospitals that we were the pharmacy service provider to here in southeast Queensland came to us and said, "You always said you were interested in buying us if the opportunity arose. Well, we got the opportunity. Are you interested?" And we're like, "Yeah, we're definitely interested," but we didn't have the checkbook to be able to write the check for that. So we actually sold the manufacturing business, which by that stage was actually taking in orders from pharmacies all over the country. And we'd have pharmacies are, again, using the best technology available at the time, send their packaging orders through to us. We would produce those, dispatch them back to the pharmacies within a 24-hour window. And we sold that business to the Symbion, the pharmaceutical wholesaler owned by EBOS Group, and used the proceeds of that to buy the first of the Icon businesses, or the first of the day hospitals that would then become the foundation of what today is Icon Group. I went with the packaging business for 12 months or so and worked as the CEO, continued working as the CEO there. I got my way out of that contract and thought, well, what am I going to do? What am I going to do next? And one of the problems that we'd identified, and it's a significant problem in healthcare, that obviously with faxes still significantly in train, there's a lot of legacy clinical systems that are used across the healthcare organisations. And one of the things that I've always been really passionate about is the use of data to drive good decision making, whether that be in business, whether that be clinically. If you can't actually access quality information and use that to inform good decision making, you're really operating quite blind. So across our pharmacies, we had all of this information locked away into individual data sets. And we could have a patient who was lived in a nursing home that was looked after by one of our pharmacies, go into a hospital that was looked after by one of our pharmacies, with no ability to actually have the hospital pharmacists be able to see what medications are on in the nursing homes. And it wasn't just inefficient, it was also unsafe. So we set about building thought, well, how can we can sort this. We'll build a tech company and build an overlaying platform that sat across all of those different clinical systems, essentially suck the data out, push some data in, and delivered a whole lot of productivity benefits across to the pharmacies. Got to the point where we were using across all of our Epic pharmacies. The rest of the pharmacy industry was sitting up and taking notice because it was actually winning us contracts, particularly in the hospital space. We developed some really innovative tools that were really transforming, not only from the safety profile, but also from the efficiency and productivity benefit of the services. So we were getting some approaches as, oh, can we have access to it? Will you actually license the products to us? And at the time, Quadrant had invested in Icon. And at the time that they invested, and we sold the management company for the pharmacy group into Icon Group as well, Epic Digital, as this company was known, was really very much in its infancy. And it was hard to put a value on. No one could really get their heads around. It was a lot more of a vision rather than a reality. And anyway, so we started getting these external approaches, and it was also getting towards the time where Quadrant were actually looking to go to market with their stake. Well, what are we going to do about this digital business? And Quadrant we'd organised at the time, initially, that we'd give Quadrant first right of refusal over it as an acquisition into Icon Group if that ever was required. And they tapped on the shoulder and said, okay, we think it's time, we can see the value it's creating, and before our stake goes to market, we really need to tidy this up so people don't come in and go, hang on a minute, significant amount of your pharmacy value is actually driven by all of these productivity tools in this software company that Stuart and Cathie own out on the side. So let's tidy that up. So Epic Digital got acquired by Icon Group and brought in there prior to the Quadrant's exit transaction. When we look at Icon as well, I think one of the things that's been a significant contributor to certainly Icon's growth and expansion and its value proposition has been the addition of radiation oncology into the mix as well. And when we always knew that we wanted that, that was part of that 2007 strategy as well. We didn't want to be just medical oncology and chemotherapy provision. We wanted to be include radiation oncology as well. We couldn't be a truly integrated clinical oncology network without providing both of those facets of care. So when we were looking as to what was going to be a really good fit and something to allow us to create good value there again, the ROQ, as it was known then, was at that stage a small group of radiation oncology centres based out of Toowoomba, but with their second location in Cairns and then their third in Gold Coast. And it really resonated with us as a business because it was very similar back to those original pharmacy days. The concept of not taking the easy route and picking something closely physically located to where you were so you could actually have that oversight, but backing yourself to actually utilise tech, build systems and processes that are transferable across multiple different regions, and being able to then roll out that strategy and replicate that time and time again. It's a real growth enabler, and we'd learnt that through the pharmacy space and our pharmacy expansion. And so it was what made Rock, one of the things that made Rock really appealing, that was the same approach that their leadership team had taken, and we could see the real potential to deliver growth and scale there by those, all the building blocks were there. They'd got those processes done and they were replicable and they were technology driven. So Rock joined Icon back in 2015 with those 3 locations, and by the time we actually had by the time Quadrant did that exit transaction, there's 30 locations today delivering across Icon Group, delivering radiation oncology. It was a bit below that at the time of this transaction, but it was still really, really significant growth in the number of the centres that we had there. And it was a significant contributor to what drove some of those valuation numbers there at the time that Quadrant exited their stake. And, we figured if you can't put yourself in a cheeky unicorn Bitmoji suit when you started at the kitchen table and delivered that kind of result, well, when can you? So that was just a bit of fun. So I guess now we get to this is still all very healthcare orientated. How do we actually get to cybersecurity, and where does that come from? And the initial link was via the healthcare business, where we had an approach. There were some people from a company called UK Cloud who were coming out to Australia, and they were interested in talking to people who were in cancer care, and we got asked if we would meet with them. So we went and had the conversation, learn a bit about what UK Cloud was, which was, sound very similar, a sovereign provider of infrastructure as a service with government as their primary client. But one of the projects that they were actually working on hosting was the 100,000 Genome Project in the UK, and which was a goal of getting 100,000 genomes, obviously, and then making that data available for utilisation for medical research, and particularly in the area of cancer care. So there was a conversation. The reason they wanted to have a conversation with us was it something that was of interest, from a research partnership perspective, everything through to was there the possibility of getting a similar project underway in Australia to add Australian genomes into the mix. And then so we were exploring those sort of conversations, which was where then we met Phil, and we started having a bigger conversation around what the actual UK Cloud business was, because these were the sort of headlines that we were seeing all the time. And certainly from the work that I'd done in technology in healthcare, it was really clearly apparent that the issues around, we'd become very, very familiar around the issues of privacy, the effective use of data, how you actually unlock data out of legacy systems that are based on premise to be able to create value, to be able to share the resource. And looking at what UK Cloud had been able to do with some of those UK government data sets, and, a really, I guess, tangible illustration that I remember Phil actually giving me at the time was if you look at births, deaths and marriages, which is where obviously all of your infant birth information has, and then you look at immunisation records, those records are run by a different department. They're run by the health department, which is not births, deaths and marriages. And so if you actually want to try and figure out what percentage of your live births are actually getting immunised, it used to be a really, really hard process, particularly when that information is locked away in on-premise servers. But both of those departments had actually pushed that information into the cloud, hosted on UK cloud platforms, and it actually enabled a really easy data correlation to be able to be delivered. So by getting the information in a secure way, and it was something that really resonated all of our careers. We've been grappling with information contained in legacy systems on-premise, old-fashioned server infrastructure. We built our business in lifting that, initially using the Citrix platform and VPNs and that type of thing, but it was all about how do you get data out of a space where very few people can see it and access it and work fundamentally with it to deliver and create value, into an environment where the people who need to have access to that information can readily access it and blend it and slice it and dice it in a way that not only makes good sense but also helps make good decisions. So that was where I guess there was a real meeting of the minds there. And so we were looking at, well, okay, we really think there's something here. We think Australia actually needs what the UK have done with UK Cloud. How do we actually make that happen? And it became pretty apparent that to meet the sovereignty requirements, to truly have the best possible value proposition around Australian government data being hosted locally, being owned and controlled by the Australian public and being able to be delivered in that manner, was going to be the one that had to be pursued, rather than being an offshoot subsidiary company of a UK-based company. So Phil took the jump on so many fronts. He left UK Cloud, he actually left the UK, he moved to Australia, based himself in Canberra, and set about building that business. And that was 5 years now that you've been out here, Phil, since he made that leap. His family is still in the UK. Obviously, pre-COVID, he was getting back to see them very regularly. That's been much more challenging over the course of the last year. So the personal sacrifice that Phil has made in building this business is not insignificant either. But I guess the culmination of the first step of the business, essentially, in literally building it from the ground up, taking it from a PowerPoint presentation into the infrastructure, building the infrastructure platform, validating the infrastructure platform, winning the hearts and minds of the Canberra decision makers and the federal department IT community. Actually, we privately funded initially. Then we went to, Ross said, I think it's time for us to have a chat with Morgans. We went and had a chat with the guys at Morgans and did a couple of rounds through Morgans, building out, again, more of the investor base. And thank you, many of you who are in the room have joined us and supported us on that journey there. And then obviously listed on the 14th of December last year under the ticker SOV, where we now are, quite literally, it's Australian hosted data that has the opportunity to be with a company to be owned by anybody in Australia who actually wants to buy a share in it. So it's certainly been quite a ride. Hopefully that gives a good illustration of how a pharmacist actually ended up in cybersecurity, which is it's certainly not anything that any of the career counsellors actually suggested as a potential career strategy, but that's a quick whistle-stop overview of what the last sort of 25 years or so have looked like. So thank you.